Good afternoon, and welcome back to Life, Death, and What Matters in Between. I'm your host, Perry Limes, and I am joined today by Alice Jo Weaver and Cathleen Rawlings. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. And on today's episode, we'll be doing the journey of with dementia, a caregiver's perspective. As we've done in the past episodes, I'd like to welcome Alice Jo and Kathleen. But before we get started, I just want to, learning about your personal stories as caregivers in every episode to help us better understand an individual's journey with dementia. We've been discussing a composite case scenario and talking about Joe, our 66-year-old African American male who's been dealing with dementia for a couple of years, and his wife of 40 years, Veronica, who is his primary caregiver. Joe and Veronica have adult daughters who live out of state but are very active in both Joe and Veronica's lives. Today, we are grateful to learn about caregivers from both a wife who cared for her husband and a daughter who cared for her mother. So with that, Alice Jo, let's start with your journey as a wife and a caregiver. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you share a little bit about your husband's journey with dementia?
Well, my husband was diagnosed in August of 2019. 2020. And in retrospect, there were symptoms and clues much sooner than that. I would say probably 2 or 3 years. And at the time he was diagnosed, it's not that it was a shock, because by that point we thought that there was something that we needed to address. But he passed away last November, and that's only a year and a half. And our understanding from the specialists and everybody else and everything that we read was that dementia and Alzheimer's is very slow, progressive. And we did not find that to be the case at all. So our journey was very difficult, and it was like a roller coaster ride, truly. There were things that happened very quickly, and it seemed at times that we were running to catch up.
Wow. That's so. So with that, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced with your husband as you started to see things decline?
I had to get very creative because I was determined that my husband would live his best life. And we communicated all the time. We were very honest about what was going on and how we were feeling and what we were going to do. And at no time did I ever make a decision or make a movement that he didn't say, okay, that it was all right with him. The challenge was trying to keep his life as normal as possible as things were progressing, when he wasn't able to walk as much, when his speech started to be difficult, when he couldn't write a check, and I had to step in. I asked, do you want me to do it? And he said, yes. When he couldn't read anymore, when he couldn't do his affirmations that he'd been doing for like 19 years.
Wow.
He couldn't read. And I tried in every way I could to make things possible with books on tape, walkers when he needed it, different types of walkers, different foods that he was able to handle. All of those things were a great challenge.
Wow. And I know you were talking about his articulation. Was he able to articulate with you some of his own challenges and what he felt like he couldn't? Because obviously, being a husband, being a father, he's been providing and caring his whole life. And then it's challenging when not only you can't care for the people you love, but it's challenging when you can't even care for yourself. Was he able to articulate that to you at any stage?
In a manner of speaking, yes. Like I said, we discussed everything, but it was hard for him to truly grasp what was happening with him because it was so quick. And I know it bothered him, but he never at any time expressed frustration until the very end, several weeks before he passed. He looked at me and he said, I can't wait until I can get out of this bed and do this on my own.
Wow.
He knew very clearly, he was a very intelligent man, and he knew very clearly what was happening. But it was a knowing that it didn't allow for him to accept it. And he was very gracious about it. He was very appreciative of everything that everyone did for him. He loved when the family was around him. But getting that specific, other than a few comments along those same lines, he didn't really want to go into it too much because he would really have to acknowledge and admit it. And he was going to fight it till the end.
He's a fighter also.
Yes.
So Kathleen, why don't we discuss your journey as a caregiver, and also as a daughter? Could you share about your mom's journey and what you saw from that vantage point, as well as your dad?
Sure. So, my mom's journey was a little bit longer than yours. Your husband's was probably about 10 years. She was 62 when we started noticing some changes, and she was still working at that point, and they were going to have a new computer system. And she said, oh, I'm just going to retire. That's just too complicated for me now. We're like, oh, okay, Mom, that sounds okay. I understand you're not wanting to start something new. But very shortly after we started to see some other changes, she would forget where she parked her car, and at first it's like, oh, everybody does that once in a while. But then when she really had to call my father to kind of come get her, and they had to go through the whole parking lot. So there was quite a few years of that. I would say probably about 3 or 4 years where she was just sort of covering everything up, and she actually did not want to talk about it at all. And if you brought it up, she'd get really, really angry and put it off on you. You're doing this because you're mean. This is not me. There's nothing wrong with me. So we never, for a long time, couldn't get her to go see someone or talk about it. And so then my dad would cover for her as well, so that we wouldn't push the subject. Because the more you pushed it, the angrier she would get. And then she would say it's all your fault and not talk to you. So I sort of made the decision, well, I'm not going to be that person. I'm just going to go along with things until it's obvious and you need more help. So that happened, I would say probably around 2014, 15 is when it really got more apparent. I ended up getting pregnant around that time, and she was really excited about that, but would forget that I was pregnant until I would come over and she'd be super excited that I was going to have a baby. And then after about 2015, about 5 years into everything, it really started to become more apparent. She had a couple of episodes where she wouldn't get out of bed, and she would cry a lot. And so finally my dad's like, okay, we really need to do something. And that's when we got to the neurologist, and got the diagnosis, which me and my family knew was going to happen. But I think it was probably really hard for my dad because he knew it was too, but he just didn't want to admit it either, because to him somehow, I think he felt like he had failed somehow.
Right.
So it was tough for him. But once we got there, we got her on some medicines to help sort of the emotional side of things, and got her a little more stable. And she had a few more years where she was pretty interactive, but a steady sort of decline. And she really enjoyed, family time, and that really brightened her all the time. And then she passed away in 2020. So we had about a 10-year journey.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, again, same question as I posed to Alice Joe. What do you find, at least from your point of view as a child, definitely an adult child, some of the challenges that you faced in caring for your mom?
I think probably one of the hardest things was sort of that sandwich generation. I think trying to manage time, get everybody what I felt they needed, and just trying to sort of find the balance between all of those things to make sure that I could be a good mother, I could be a good daughter, and still have a life of my own, which I didn't for a while.
Yeah, yeah. I would assume that there's a lot going on in terms of the caregiving aspect, physically, emotionally, mentally. You're really invested in your loved one's care. Um, Let me ask you both, and I'll ask you first, Kathleen, and then Alice Joe. What surprised you the most about your mom's journey with dementia?
Um, there were a few things. I think initially it was sort of getting the diagnosis, getting into sort of the medical system with a diagnosis, and really the very little guidance and information that you're given. Sort of like, here's your diagnosis, here are some medicines, we'll see in a couple of months and see how it goes. So I think just trying to figure out what's the next step, what should we do, when do we intervene more, when do we don't. Just there were a lot of questions that the neurologist and the primary care doctor in the beginning really weren't really helpful. The other thing that really surprised me about the dementia itself was the mood swings and the huge personality change that occurred. And the person that she just wasn't anymore. And I think that was very surprising to me, that she's not going to just be this cute little old lady who says funny things.
Right.
But she, became very angry with a lot of things and, lashed out quite a bit. And so that was surprising and very difficult to help care for her. But, that was one of the stages, and then that passes as well, and you get into the next stage. So I think those were probably the two most surprising things.
Right. And how about yourself, Alice Joe? What surprised you the most about your husband's journey with dementia?
Well, when we got the diagnosis, as I said before, we weren't necessarily surprised, but we were encouraged because the specialists and everyone said we could have 10, 15, 20 years because it was slow to progress. So my husband and I made plans. We had bucket lists. We were going to do what we could and have as much, as rich a life as we could together. And none of that really happened because of how quickly he declined. It was not month by month. Sometimes it was week by week. And sometimes he would be a different person one day and a totally different person the next day with what he was able to do. So that was a huge surprise. And the fact that the specialists had no idea what to do about it, because this was not normal, which if they would say it that way. And so they really didn't have any insights for me. The one place that I did go, it was huge, was the Alzheimer's Association. They were amazing. And I got so much good advice and so many resources and good information from them. So that was the biggest surprise for me.
Oh, that's great. I just kind of listening to Kathleen, I think many times when she's right, you get these diagnoses, you would almost hope there's kind of a playbook of what things look like as you move forward. But you're just kind of, given a bottle of water and just go run 100 miles out there, and you got to kind of figure it out. So, definitely I tip my hat off to you, Kathleen, because there's a lot of on the fly thinking and ad-libbing that you have to do, it sounds like. And no two cases are the same, but in Alice's case, it looked like you got some support from that Alzheimer's Association, and sometimes that helps. So I I definitely want to commend you both, because I hope in today's podcast, the two of you can be kind of a beacon of light for others that are starting this journey, and at least get some kind of understanding on what it looks like moving forward. Um, I can imagine that both of you have dealt with a good amount of stress and anxiety in dealing with your loved ones. Um, what could you tell our audience today as caregivers that you can do, or what did you do to kind of alleviate some of that anxiety and that stress, Alice? How did you, as what we call caregiver burnout, you want to be there and you're constantly in the trenches, but you're only human and you breathe oxygen and need to sleep and eat and kind of take care of yourself. So what did you do to take care of yourself and take care of some of that stress?
Well, after a while, I needed a little assistance in the house because I could no longer get out and be confident that my husband would be safe. So I contacted the visiting angels, and I had somebody come in a couple of times a week for a couple of hours so I could get away from the house and get some shopping done and just take a walk if I needed to. At first, that was very difficult because I would walk out and then I would immediately want to turn around and get right back in there
Right.
again. But over time, I was pretty okay with it. And I appreciated all the support that they gave. I was also very fortunate to have a whole network of people, family and friends and church community, who would have been right there if I had ever needed anything. And while I appreciated that, I think I managed to keep a decent balance of kind of self-help to relieve my stress and being there for my husband 24/7.
That's awesome. That is awesome. How about yourself, Kathleen?
I think I battled the stress and anxiety in the beginning, probably not as good as I should have. And looking back, I think I got into some of the social media outlets to be able to see what other people were doing and see how they dealt with it. And just seeing their stories and realizing, you know what, I'm not the only one doing this and I'm not doing a bad job. And, I think I had a lot of anxiety for my father.
Mm-hmm.
So I would create standing dates. So I would go over there, twice a week, at least with my son, who made everybody feel better. And so if my dad wasn't anxious, then I felt better. And so just creating that time to sort of carve out specifically when I was going to be there, and then, coming in at other times as well. But I think just realizing that you get to a point, especially when it's a long journey, of, you know what, you have to sort of just take all of this as it comes, and really just understanding I'm doing the best for them. This is not going to go on forever. And so I need to give her the best life she can have. And that really, I think, is what got me through quite a bit of the stress, is just knowing that I was doing the best I could for her. And her intention was always to be at home, to stay home, to not have to be put anywhere. That was one of her biggest fears. So I think being able to honor that made a big difference.
That's awesome. And I appreciate you both sharing that. I hear that often in these caregiver situations, what Alice described as that guilt of walking out the door and then feeling you have to turn back because you have to do it all, and kind of letting that go so you can, many of these caregivers and support systems are truly vessels that help you help others. So again, thank you for sharing that. That's a perfect segue, because you both experienced hospice services through this journey with dementia. Could you both kind of share what that experience was like, and what did hospice services provide to your mom, Kathleen, and to your husband, Alice, um, in regards specifically to their dementia, and how did it help them and help you? And now I'll go with Alice.
All right. Well, being a part of the hospice organization made a huge difference. They were an outlet to answer our questions. Their support was unparalleled. 24/7. You just pick up the phone. They will tell you what you need to hear, support you in whatever way happens. They were right at the door when I needed something. They came on time and on a regular basis, the different professionals, and took care of my husband. He was very comfortable with them. They were always positive and made him feel comfortable, especially when they had to help me to care for his needs because I couldn't do it by myself. And that was huge because he was a very private person, outgoing but private, and he appreciated them being so welcoming and loving to him. And the nurses, the several times that I had to call in the middle of the night, it was never a problem. It was just something that I didn't have to worry about.
That's awesome. How about yourself, Kathleen?
Well, I definitely echo what you said, and that the fact that they really just were there whenever you needed them. We started with hospice right in April of 2020, so right in the beginning of the pandemic. So it was really almost it was really a relief to be able to get some help at that point and have them come into the house, and just even from the initial assessment, just the feeling of you can almost breathe because someone is going to be there no matter what's going on in the world around us at that point. And that they were still going to come into the home and they were still going to be doing the things that we needed help with. And again, just being able to call them and just laying out sort of the path that was going to be in front of us for a little while really helped my dad tremendously to sort of see what that was going to be. And he was able to get one-on-one time with the nurses and the aides who were coming in. And they were really able to just chat with him a little bit, because at that point my mom was pretty well bedbound and sleeping most of the time. So he, I think, got the benefit of their company and their care, maybe even more than my mother did at that point, but that's what we needed. And so that was really huge that he was able to create a relationship with some of the providers and, really be there for us when we needed. We also utilized some of the tele-counseling that was available. So that was really helpful for my family to get through some of the hard spots.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. I know in 2020 and pretty much the beginning of the pandemic, it was very difficult for caregivers, at least professional caregivers, to get out to families. So, even utilizing the technology to make sure that they were still there for your mom, your dad, and yourself and the family, it's really great to hear that. Um, you know, for both of you, your stories both are so rich and so deep. Are there any lessons learned that you could share with caregivers out here that are caring for a loved one with dementia? Because it definitely sounds like you were in it from beginning to end, and any gems that you can share with our audience. Alice?
Yes, I I don't know how much of a gem it is, but to be gentle and patient with yourself, and also to be gentle and patient with your family, your children. Everyone deals with this in their own way. And relationships change, and you have to go with it as best you can. Friends are always very helpful, but sometimes they assume. For example, if you're having a lunch with someone and you're having a good time, and you're able to relax a little bit, and they're saying, "Oh, you're handling this so well." Well, you're not. The outside is one story, but what's happening inside is total turmoil and chaos and pain, and that doesn't go away. Just be gentle.
Great pearl of wisdom there. Thank you so much. What about yourself, Kathleen?
I think, Alice, you really definitely, said that very well. And I do agree. You really have to just sort of do the best you can. The old adage, do the best you can with what you have. And take each moment for what it is. Don't try and look too far in the future.
Nope.
Don't worry about what happened yesterday or even 5 minutes ago sometimes, because that's gone, just to really be present in the moment with your family and with your loved one. Be honest with people who ask you how you are. It's okay to say, I'm terrible, and get the support. So I think just really being present, being open to help, being open to trying new things. And just because you did it one way one day doesn't mean it's going to work the same way the next day. And just to really enjoy the parts that you can.
Well said, ladies. Well said. The takeaway that our audience can get from this is that caregivers are an important part of the journey with dementia, whether it be personal caregivers such as yourselves, family members, or even professional caregivers. When the condition of dementia progresses and hospice care is even needed, it can be a valuable resource to families and their loved ones. So again, I want to thank you for both sharing your powerful stories. This was truly a amazing testimony from you both. And thank you so much again for your presence today and your participation. We'd like to thank the John and Kathy Belcher Institute for their generous support of our community outreach and education programs. Thank you so much.